before having started the company, I was in information security, and we would fingerprint companies from the outside, be able to tell what their vulnerabilities were based on this echo, or we'd ping and we'd be able to test vulnerabilities. And we got this map for how to address the challenges at hand. And I always remembered that. And as we were moving through marketing communications, I thought, man, there's something here to combine both of these things.
That was Mike Stratta, CEO of Chicago-based Arcalea, a marketing and analytics consultancy that found itself on the Financial Times fastest growing firms list, as well as Inc. magazine's fastest growing firms for 2 years in a row. Mike is also a Kellogg MBA and holds a Master's of Science in Data Science, also from Kellogg. Mike is also a regular lecturer at University of Chicago, DePaul, Columbia, Loyola. I wonder if he knows Sister Jean. Long story short, Mike is everywhere, and so is Arcalea. They've just been doing incredible work over the past 4 or 5 years. And particularly in marketing and marketing analytics, which is a part of business I'm a relative newcomer to, Mike really outlines how the well-worn paths to success that you may have found, 5 or 6 years ago even, are almost completely unrecognizable today. And I think Mike and his organization have just really figured out a nice way to lead companies through all the stages necessary to understand the new order of things and how to take advantage. Like I said, I learned quite a lot. What I really like about, or actually I love about Mike and the firm that he has built, is that they employ all of these tactics on their own business, which I believe is really, the proof is in the pudding, right? I mean, if you are teaching others to do something a specific way and you believe it, why wouldn't you do that in your own companies? And, many times I see organizations, consulting organizations in particular, come into companies and, give them a playbook. And the playbook looks nothing like how they themselves had grown. And that always strikes me as odd. It's important, I believe, to really follow the principles that you espouse. I think that is a mark of a really good organization, and one that is looking to become a partner and a steward. And so we had a really great conversation, and we learned a lot about Mike and how he's gotten to this place as an entrepreneur, including topics like starting a business in your 20s and the risk tolerance from the perspective of a 20-year-old, the utility of an MBA, and he definitely has leaned into developing himself, finishing multiple graduate degrees. And in today's day and age, there's just lots of discussion and debate about the need for such things and whether you would even want an MBA, that is, or a graduate degree in an entrepreneurial setting. And he actually had an incredibly good answer, probably the best I've heard on that subject. And I think he's really thought that opportunity through personally, and it resonated with me. And then finally, we got into his current business and around marketing analytics, and a discipline that he's actually really innovated in with this new company. And it was precipitated by a very real sea change in the industry, as we talked about, and it taking place in a relatively short period of time. And that's really where Mike's work gets truly fascinating. He's developed I call it something of an algorithmic approach to analyzing a firm's needs. For example, their step one is to gather data and listen for very specific signals that Arcalea uses to compare their clients to leading companies inside a specific market or competitive landscape. And it's the specific competitive landscape that client happens to be in, not the broader market. They've developed some very interesting ways to think about that. And it was all an idea, I think, borrowed from his days as a cybersecurity consultant of all things. But that really is where innovation happens, putting interesting ideas together from different disciplines, and that takes some thought and imagination. And I think it was just an eye-opening part of the conversation. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Mike Stratta.
Uh, well, thank you. ARC was kind of founded around just under 6 years ago, and it was it was after I spent a stint in the marketing communications, and in kind of a broader sense. We were a creative shop, and we managed everything from print and radio and television, and we were this nimble, smaller shop. And it's tough to compete on that level, and we did that for around 13, 14 years. And right around that 2010 mark, when I first saw the hallmarks of this data kind of thread that were really starting to take off. I mean, in the 2000s, late 2008, 9, 10, there were whispers of it, and it was becoming this thing, right? But it's nothing like we recognize today. And right around that 2010, 2012 mark, we recognized, or I started to sense that there was a new story evolving. And my past was before having started the company, I was in information security, and we would fingerprint companies from the outside, be able to tell what their vulnerabilities were based on this echo, or we'd ping, and we'd be able to test vulnerabilities. And we got this map for how to address the challenges at hand. And I always remembered that. And as we were moving through marketing communications, I thought, man, there's something here to combine both of these things. And in 2011 is when I was like, I recognize that there's an opportunity to combine those two elements in this new assessment. And we started putting the first steps, put first foot in front of the other on building kind of a product that would address evaluation of brands in the digital space. And flash forward to 2021 now, our first product is to evaluate. The first we engage with any brand is to assess their entire communication profile in all digital, which for many brands is all that they have, is all that matters. And we decompose or deconstruct who is successful in the space and why across all these dimensions. There's about 20 to 25 dimensions. And it lets us start with brands from the beginning with an edge that no one else has, and then we simply hold that up against company objectives, business goals, strategy, and begin to execute.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I love that you connected some very interesting things, from cybersecurity and your work in marketing and analytics. I did want to ask you, this is your second company. Is that sort of, or second startup, is that in your DNA? Do you just love this sort of thing? Do you feel like you have a higher risk tolerance than others, potentially?
I think it's a little of both. I think now I definitely have risk tolerance that probably others don't. But I think when you start off, I mean, when we started this, I was in my late 20s, right? Risk tolerance is not something that you even are aware of in your 20s. You're just like, what's risk? You have this feeling that the future is all in front of you, and you can do anything and recover from it. And so I think at the time it wasn't risk to me. It was adventure, right? It was like this thrill of innovation and thrill of an opportunity.
No, absolutely. But, even if your ideas are incredible, this process of building a new entity, of being an entrepreneur is just an enormous grind, and probably the reason why so many fail. And you've done it twice. It just seems like this pattern is starting to become much more clear to you. And, maybe how did the first version of your previous exit really affect what you're doing now, if at all?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, when we started the first time, it was a fluke. It was something that I wasn't like, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. Like when we graduated college and high school, entrepreneurship was not a word that was, if you looked up the search history on it, it was not huge at the time. And it was almost a dirty word. It meant you had to do it by yourself. Like it just was like a solopreneur, like a at-home business. Flash forward many years later, it's now like it's something that you can aspire to be. And at the time, we just were like, I think we can do this on our own. I think we can unchain ourselves from corporate and be the masters of our destiny. And I had a business partner at the time, and we met on this crazy Craigslist film set. Like we literally both raised our hands to do this short film, and happened to meet as a byproduct of this passion that we were trying to chase, and said, I think you're a pretty reliable person. Like, do you think we could try and get some business this way? And that's how it started. And then you got to realize that you're going to skin your knee 1,000 times. You're going to take a lot of hits along the way. You're going to make terrible, horrible mistakes, which we made many, many, many times. And I think that the daunting part is being like, I don't know everything. How could I possibly be an entrepreneur? And the dirty secret is that you don't have to be. You don't have to know that you are one. You just have to know how to get to the next step and maybe get a little business, and know that if you work hard enough, you can deliver. And acting like it long enough, you become it. And it's like anything. You try. You're going to fail a million. What I share with classes and other aspiring entrepreneurs is like, know that you will fail. Know that your idea will be wrong. Your calculations will be off. You'll miss by 1,000%, but also know that you have control of it, and you can go out and get more business. You can try it again. You can, and I think that's the biggest lesson of all.
No, I think that's really good advice. Probably the best advice. And you mentioned you're speaking to a lot of graduate students and MBA classes. Maybe give us a little bit about your background and sort of where'd you go to school, where did you end up in your graduate programs, and just schooling background, et cetera.
Yeah, it's interesting because went to out of high school, went to Miami of Ohio, and I actually was there for 5 years. I was there a long time. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I changed classes. Like it seemed to drag on forever. I graduated in the .com boom and moved to Chicago and got a job. And, I was doing the dual work. I was had a real job in information security consulting. And then at night I was moonlighting and trying to break into the film industry of all things in Chicago, which makes zero sense whatsoever. Right. And then I met my future business partner on one of those film sets, and we were like, let's try and get some business. And it wasn't until having worked in the field for 15 years in marketing, finally sold out of the company, said, I want to start something new. I started Archilea. That I was like, I had all this. I've been a part of entrepreneurship communities for the last 15 years, ever since the beginning of that, and gotten so much value out of it. But that's like everyone in those communities, like from the street, like we brought ourselves up through just bootstrapping our companies. And, EO is an example, one entrepreneurs organization, member of Vistage. But at the end of that first sale, I recognized that I had a formal education that I was still missing. And I decided to try and go back and get my MBA. And because it's so marketing and advertising heavy, I applied to Kellogg here at Northwestern. And I spent 2 years in that program. And it was one of the greatest learning experiences of my career. And so, now I speak at many of those, including Kellogg, but Loyola and University of Chicago and Columbia here in town. Every chance I get, I try and help young entrepreneurs and young, leaders get their DePaul, get their questions answered and get a great start to it, because it's the most freeing experience to be able to control what happens to you in the future, and to say, let's go left instead of right, and then to live and die by those circumstances, those consequences. It's a wonderful experience to share.
You mentioned you went to Kellogg, which is an incredible institution, and it does feel like entrepreneurs these days talk a lot about, after, especially if they've been in a successful startup, they tend to not look at the MBA as a necessary part of their journey. and may not feel it's as important as it once was. Um, is it something that you feel like for yourself was necessary for you to take the next step, or did it provide opportunities in other ways? How would you characterize an MBA today?
I'm an entrepreneur. I don't have access to necessarily the corporate environments. Like you have access to historical information, institutional knowledge that I am locked out of, and to be able to get that information, that feedback from from those members of the corporate world and in other entrepreneurs that are also graduates of Kellogg, and to be able to finally speak the language of business that I had trouble. There are elements that I needed to really fill in, Jason, honestly. Like you can run a company and still have serious weak spots uh, happens every day. And I was one of them. And although they're slightly less weak spots today, at least I know what I'm good at and I know where my weak spots are. So
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess, you mentioned expanding your networks to understand a bit more of what's on the inside of some of these large companies and clients that you work with. I suppose you think maybe it's primarily an access thing, or, what are some of the other, benefits, large benefits that you feel like you're gleaning from having an MBA and using an MBA in your entrepreneurial work?
first of all, they're all other folks that decided to give up 2 years of their life too at the midpoint in the career or late in their whatever it might be. They're all your age, you're our age, and they're all aspiring to something more, and they all have a drive, and they all have an element of success, to their own in their own right, and the bonds that you create while you're there are different than they were in undergrad, because in undergrad, like, you were there, but your primary, I don't know, I'll speak for myself. I wasn't primarily there to learn, right? I was 20 years old. So now what we're doing is we're focusing on sharpening and getting to our best, selves. And it's different. And I think to be able to have access to those and call somebody that's high up at Walmart or someone who's in biotech and, on a global scale that are doing business in these crazy, amazing industries, and get their feedback and insights is something that is super, super unique. And I do rely on fairly regularly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I do feel like, as someone who has worked in corporate environments for most of my career, maybe that's something that I take for granted in terms of the ability to sort of make phone calls and network with people in the industries that I'm paying close attention to. So, I did want to ask a question. You mentioned that there are other people in the midpoint of their careers, and some of the characteristics that tend to show up in those folks. And I guess I wanted to ask you about where those tendencies tend to come from, maybe inside of you. I know you're a high achiever. Just a number of things that I could say about you that are all very positive things. And I often wonder, where do you think that was developed? Was it something that happened when you were growing up? Was it an influence that you recall? Was it something else? Was it something that, came from your, your early business experiences? Maybe talk about that a little bit.
I think that, there's part of me that is a competitor, and part of me that is a tinkerer and has always wanted to see what happens if, right. And I'm curious at heart. And that curiosity is, somewhere early in corporate, I had someone take me aside and said, "Oh man, information security, like, you could do this for another 30 years. And all I heard was 30 years, 30 years. And I was just like, no way, I'm doing this for 30 years. Like, I've got to get out of here. And in the thought, for one moment, I was like, if I quit this job, like, what's going to happen? And then I was like, I'm 20 something, like, let's just try it. And that was the last time I was ever like, I hate what I'm doing. I got to try to do something else. Now I'm doing it. And I think there was something early in life that was like, saw that my father was military and grew up on military bases. And I was like, there's something really magical about the hierarchy and like the structure about it. But there was also something that was terrifying. It was like you had to slot in here and you had to like have your shoes shined a certain way and like go attention if you're outside to the flagpole at 5 p.m. Like there's all this regimented structure. And I think at some point I rebelled against that. And I ultimately was like, I rebelled against like the structure of undergrad and like how corporations, I was like, why do I have to do that? Like, it's inefficient. Like I can do this more efficiently myself. And then it just clicked. And I was like, I can do this more efficiently myself, at least more efficiently for me. And the part about corporate is that the whole element of being in corporate is to create efficiency for the organization. As long as you're extracting enough value that it makes sense to you, then perfect. But I think that's what broke in my mind early in life. I was just like, why do this for someone else? Like when you can do it for yourself.
Yeah. So maybe tell us a little bit about where you grew up, maybe a little more about yourself, your background. You know, I know you grew up in Indiana, but maybe a little more about early influences in your life, et cetera.
You know, it's funny. So my mom is from Indiana. My dad's from upstate New York, and that's where they both reside now. And I was born in Pennsylvania, and we moved a ton. And then in grade school, late grade school, I moved to Indiana. And I think so I'm pulling from different sources for that question. But one of the core values that we hold true today is to deliver. And there is an element of kind of, you know, all cultural has a regional element or has like these imaginary boundaries or these real boundaries, be it geographical or whatever, where, you know, you think it's unique to that, but you can find it elsewhere. And I think the Midwest has a kind of, you know, if you gave your word on something, you're going to do it regardless of the personal sacrifice it requires. And I think that's where that core value for us was born. Just growing up, you know, it's something where I have family that are farmers and they work, you know, 3 jobs, factory, they work in the farm, and they have some other form of income to support their families. And it's because there's this ingrained work ethic of you do what you have to do to get it done. And seeing that, you know, we tend to think we work hard here because we were at a desk for, you know, for 10 hours or 12 hours a day. And I guarantee you, until you've worked like that, or how some people elsewhere on the planet work, we don't really know what work is. And I think having that, another one is having gratitude for the opportunity to even be in this chair right now, right? Is just to be able to say thank you, you know, for giving me this opportunity and not letting that be lost on us in any way. And I think those are a couple of the core ones that come to mind first.
Yeah, I really like that answer. In fact, you know, when I speak to audiences and folks that sort of work in my industry or work in my organization, I've regularly shared the fact that, you know, I feel like we've sort of hit the cosmic lottery in some ways, especially if you're thinking about the Midwest in the United States, in the world we live in. Now, there's a lot that can improve and needs to improve, and we could talk about that endlessly. But I do think having the frame of reference that is mostly focused on gratitude is a really important lesson. And so, you know, I do think being grateful and looking at every day here as a gift and an opportunity is a really important way to think about it. In terms of just the Midwestern values that you spoke about, where do you see those really fitting into the world that you're in now? And you know, how do they relate or cross over into that world?
So there's 2 points. One of them is a short one, which is, you know, I thought you were headed in like, how does that manifest effectively in owning a business and running a business? And the short answer to that is that it can be detrimental to you if you basically make deals on trust and say, no, I get you. We shook hands and I'll deliver if you deliver. And I've gotten burned by that over the years to the point where I'm actually, I'd like to we do business on a handshake and then we verify with contracts, right? And we verify with, and so it's been a bit of an adjustment because I'd rather do business on a handshake, but through time I've recognized like there's a need for a formality to it and to probably be a little bit more stringent than that. The answer to your question, that's a lot more interesting answer, is as it relates to data, there's an ethical dilemma when it comes to the use of data, because we put, and this will resonate, I think, immediately, but you put data in a graph and you show somebody a graph and you tell them it's true. There's a bias associated with seeing that and saying, well, I mean, it's in a graph, it's Excel, it must be true, right? Clearly, the purple is larger than the red. And that presents a number of very difficult dilemmas when you're working in data that you have to be aware of, and you have to be vigilant against making these mistakes of representing something to an audience that you're unsure of, or that you perhaps haven't performed the right diligence upon, and risking misleading and allowing them to fall into that same bias or that same trap of just believing it because you said it was true. And so this whole industry is challenged with that information right now, because everyone's yelling AI and everyone's talking about machine learning. And like, as soon as you say AI, there's like this perception that it must be the solution it's right because it has AI in it. And that couldn't be further from the truth. And so I think that's where it really plays in, is saying, we have to look internally and say to ourselves, are we representing the truth faithfully? And can we stand behind this work to the degree that it is, to the best of our knowledge, scientifically provable or absolutely correct? And if not, are we sharing the potential variability or the potential element of error with the client or with the audience, whomever that is? Is that a good, fair example?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Very fair example. And I would say in today's day and age, there's just so much, noise in the system. And I don't think people have a real clear idea of who to trust. And because it seems to be so easy to manipulate the data. And so, I guess that raises a question for me. And that's, trying to find signal in the noise and doing that on behalf of clients. I mean, how do you develop and foster relationships with customers when that's happening so frequently? And, maybe, how do you express your trustworthiness and get to know them as people and really figure out a way to become a great partner for your customers?
Yeah, I think it all starts with who the people are, right? I typically have an early relationship with them, and we share from the beginning. Like we're not trying to push any services. We want to help the leadership team figure out what is best for the leadership team and what's best for the organization. And that might mean that there are things that we recommend that we don't provide. That's the goal. Actually, the goal is for us to help watch the watcher in some cases. And in some cases, we're hired to perform machine learning and data analysis on work that other companies are providing as kind of the referee, as kind of the scorekeeper, so to speak, and simply advise. I love those relationships because it's so clear that we don't have a horse in the race. We're simply making calculations, looking at trend and analytics and saying, here's what the landscape looks like. And I think that's where we prefer to begin is where we prefer to begin is without knowing anything about what you're trying to accomplish or what you may hire us for afterwards. Let's analyze this market, understand how it works and how those who are succeeding are succeeding. We break it all down and then we say, now this is how this game is played. Tell me what your business goals are and we will prescribe to you what we believe is the best weighted expression of tactics in this market. And then you can decide if you're going to do it or if you'd like help with any aspect of it. And I think that approach resonates because agencies will come in and say, Oh, I know what you need. You need this, 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 and media spend would be this. And my answer to that is, how could you possibly know what somebody needs if you don't understand the entire market and how it works? Because every market has similar components, but every game is different. Every competitive landscape is different, and only by understanding that competitive landscape can you understand how this system works. And so we took the agency model, which I was very familiar with, and said, let's break it. Let's bring in this whole other data science component and let's recombine. And so most of our team members, we've got advanced degrees in data science and data analytics, MBAs on staff. And I think it tends to lead to a higher level of dialogue in general, rather than not because of the education level necessarily, but because we're all coming from this aspect of let's learn, let's figure this out, and then let's take action.
Okay. Yeah. Got it. Just out of curiosity, what's the target size range for customers that you typically work with?
Yeah. It's typically, 20 to 250 million in revenue, but we have some that are below that. And then we have some global, $1 billion companies that perform. The analysis is the same.
Okay. So I guess if the analysis is the same, do you sense that there's a bigger opportunity based on scale of the organization? Do smaller companies or larger companies have a bigger hill to climb? And, in terms of how they transform digitally, do you think smaller companies or larger companies have an advantage, or do you think it's just a horse apiece?
This is so fascinating because it gets into the concept of digital transformation, right? So on one end of the spectrum, so first of all, let me back up. That whole assessment is only one part of the puzzle. The other part of the puzzle is internal to the organization. We kind of live in this fallacy that if you go to online advertising, like you turn it on and man, you're going to start cashing checks, right? Because it's just going to work. The problem is that was true for a little while. That was true in like the early 2000s and 2010s, even, like, because not everyone had caught up to kind of the steady state, right? The ambient level of whatever it is in your industry. Today, you can count on that everyone's got a website and they're performing of a minimum benchmarks, right? They're probably competing on advertising and everything else. And all of advertising today uses AI of some form. So basically the level that everyone's competing at is now leveled off. And and that's a commodity effectively. Like, you can find differentiation amongst this, but it's effectively a commodity if you take it to a high enough level. That means that the only thing you can add to it is your own data set, or you can enrich that data of how you're going about addressing the market. But what we have found is that the best result is in bringing the company's data that is mid-funnel and adding it to the external approach for a much, much higher gain in efficiency and return, et cetera. So what that means is that the infrastructure to track the user, whether it's first-party data or third-party data, et cetera, the infrastructure is super important. A CRM, a CDP, understanding lifetime values, et cetera. And only when you layer that on top of that market approach, do you get really, really successful. Now, the challenge is twofold. With a small company, they don't typically have the infrastructure, or it's not mature enough to really leverage in the right way. And so we help, in a consultative basis, help to build that and mature it. With big organizations, they have the opposite problem. They have grown for 50 years by acquiring 20 different companies, right? And they have disparate networks and disparate data sets, and they can't control them. They have no idea how to get it into a unified, workable set of data. And so there are challenges and benefits to each. It's just a matter of, a big part of it comes down to leadership. And if they're buying into this concept and they're forward leaning and they have an appetite for change, or if they're like, let's just kind of wait and see what happens, or if it's too cumbersome to kind of leverage. Does that resonate?
Oh, absolutely. That resonates 100%. I think, I'm coming from larger organizations, especially in the era of consolidation in certain industries where, people are buying opportunities, in the form of other companies. And I think, those data sets, the amount and the ability for organizations to put them together is really, really strained. And I also think, leadership is crucial because oftentimes those larger companies, as I'm sure you know, they've been successful. I mean, that's why they're growing. And, success can be one of the biggest challenges to improvement, because it's sort of, you feel like, in the case of some of these larger organizations, it's like, don't kill the money tree. Don't change anything. If you change something as a frontline leader, as a leader in general, you could risk doing something that would upset the apple cart. And I think that's a challenge. And, so I guess it's very, very debilitating. And I guess, what's your take on that? Do you see that in the organizations that you're working with?
So this is what's very interesting is that a lot of times we think in terms of these narratives that we kind of tell ourselves these stories. And one of that story that you just recalled is like, that's the money tree. Let's not mess with it because it's not broken. And there's something nested behind that, which is like, I don't want to be the one that's responsible for changing this model, or, like, it's not like, let's not look at the data, what the data is telling us. And I think that is what I'm experiencing now when I speak with leadership of various organizations is either the organization gets it and they've got C-levels, either the CEO, CMO, that say, we get it. Like, let's talk about the data and what the narrative that underpins that data, or that what the narrative is that the data is telling us. Or they say what you just described, which is, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I still feel this, right? And the danger in that statement is the feel part, is that our guts are kind of telling us, no, stay in the safe side of this because it's what I know. And there's a bias there that you kind of alluded to. And I think that's what's so frustrating for us, is that sometimes we'll get in and say, this is actually why I started ARC. I sat in so many CMO meetings, CEO meetings, global brands. I could tell you I won't, where I've heard literally, I hear what you're saying, what the data tells us, but I asked my daughter what she thought last night, and she wants to go with this one instead of that one. So that's what we're going to do. And it blew my mind. And I see it over and over again. I still hear it today, not some version of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that's what makes what you are doing so impressive. I mean, I think being able to simplify the conversation and focus the conversation, I should say, on the right, on the appropriate places for people to really understand, how to use this information and data and move their marketing and analytics activities forward. I just think it's impressive, and I've been really impressed with you and your team over the years, just watching what you're doing. And I did want to ask, maybe we could pivot a little bit here and finish up. But before I did that, I wanted to ask, what are some of the things that you just are proud of? What are some of the things that you have done in your career and that really stick out in your mind that really make you proud?
I've got some team members that have been with me for 5 and 6 years, some that came from my prior life. And, we have regular weekly meetings with my leadership team, and to be a part of the personal and professional development, and to have your core values, to have refined mine over time. I'm not the same, leader I was 5 years ago, let alone 15 years ago, but to evolve myself, and then to be able to create something that one, people follow, like care to follow, that they're like, hey, yeah, I'll go with you on this journey that's crazy. And, some of these folks are 25. This is their first job, and they love what they're doing every day. And we're continuously bringing more into that fold and showing them that it can be done. And I think it's just like, wow. Like, if I left right now, they would spin off and become like their own, machines of industry. And it's amazing. It's amazing to be a part of professional and personal development at that level.
Yeah, I really like that. And it really is fun to see other people achieve their goals and to help them through their careers and help them realize their potential, for sure. And I would say, Mike, that actually brings us to the end of our time, and we actually went a little over. So wanted to say to you, just incredibly appreciative of getting a chance to sit down with you and pick your brain a little bit, hear about your journey and your career and all the great things you're doing with your new company. And thanks for being on #Midwest.
Oh, Jason, thank you. I appreciate it, and thanks for having me anytime.
As I mentioned before, our show is only possible with the help of sponsors, so I wanted to say a very big thank you to New Resources Consulting, as well as Capital Data Analytics, as well as all of the folks at #Midwest that have worked so hard to make these shows possible. Special thanks again to Mike Stratta of Archilea. And if you have a show idea, topic, guest, etc., please don't hesitate to go to #Midwest.com and drop us a note. You have been listening to Executive Stories on #Midwest. Take care.